This incident took place back in October 2022. I was residing alone within a modest home situated in a neighborhood typical of family homes. I had been there since 2015 and personally witnessed the decline of Halloween celebrations after 2020. Essentially, nobody seemed to observe it anymore. None of the houses really displayed any decorations, and no children appeared interested in dressing up or going door to door for candy. This was always a significant event that everyone participated in annually prior to that. For the past 2 years, my neighborhood had been completely quiet and empty on Halloween night. Consequently, I genuinely presumed this year would be identical. On the morning of Halloween, I prepared coffee and went out onto the front porch to admire the fall-colored trees. However, the moment I opened the door, I noticed 2 individuals in my front yard, perhaps 30 feet away, standing amidst the trees. And when I say individuals, I really couldn't be certain. My assumption was based solely on them wearing Halloween masks. They were taller and slender, most likely high schoolers, if not adults. They were too far for me to get a clear look, but practically the instant I opened the door, both froze for a second, then hastily walked deeper into the trees and away from my residence. Their quick departure looked extremely suspicious. It couldn't have seemed more questionable the way they hurried off. It was precisely the reaction you'd expect if you caught someone doing something they shouldn't. Moreover, even though it was Halloween, I'd never seen anyone just wandering around in masks during the morning hours. Honestly, I figured it was likely just some youths acting foolish. I mean, with the holiday and everything, at least they walked away once they spotted me, so I didn't feel the need to be concerned. I stayed outside, enjoying the pleasant fall weather and my morning coffee. The remainder of that day was genuinely no different from any other up until around 4 p.m. This was approximately when trick-or-treaters would traditionally start appearing, although, as I mentioned, I hadn't seen any in years. Still, for reasons I'm not entirely sure of, I'd grabbed a small bag of candy and had it ready, just in case a few children did show up. I suppose it was simply the tradition itself that I was clinging on to. I sat on the sofa in the living room and switched on the television, finding a channel that was airing the usual Halloween shows and movies. I also left the curtains open by the front windows so I could observe the outside in case any children were walking around. Over the next couple of hours, I saw nothing more than a few cars driving down the street. No children or anyone else walking around. And after a while, the sun set, plunging the entire street into darkness and making it feel lifeless. Even after all these years, witnessing that on Halloween still felt strange. I remained in the living room, continuing to watch TV. Around 8 p.m., however, a knock sounded at the front door. It made me jump up from the couch. I didn't see anyone outside the windows walking up to the house, and even if it had been just a few lone trick-or-treaters, I thought it was somewhat late for anyone to still be out. I carried the bowl of candy over, anyway, and opened the door. I felt a small shiver run through me when I saw it was the same 2 individuals I'd encountered earlier. Again, they had masks on and were fully dressed in black clothing, leading me to guess they were kids. But up close, they were definitely much taller than what I'd expect from anyone still trick-or-treating. And I quickly noticed they didn't even have bags or anything to carry candy with. They just stood there. I couldn't even make out either of their eyes through the masks. This made the situation feel really strange. I still tried to offer a smile and asked if they wanted candy, holding out the bowl. Neither of them spoke. And after just a few seconds of waiting, I simply closed the door, feeling completely weirded out. But even after that second encounter with them, I still convinced myself this was just some silly Halloween prank they were pulling on me, likely trying to scare me just for the sake of messing with me. I waited a minute, then looked out the door again, and the 2 were gone. For some reason, this confirmed in my mind that this was just some stupid prank that I didn't need to overthink. I went back to the couch, watching TV well into the night. I don't think I got up until 1 or 2 a.m. to go to bed. I turned everything off and headed upstairs. By this point, the 2 individuals hadn't crossed my mind in hours. I got into bed and felt myself falling asleep within seconds, but was suddenly jolted awake by a knock echoing through the house. I quickly got up and opened my bedroom door. They knocked again right at the front door. The sound resonated through all the quiet rooms and hallways of my home. I quietly walked downstairs, trying to see who it was. I was genuinely terrified, even though I was sure it was the same individuals, because by this point it was clearly way more than just some harmless prank. This constituted stalking or harassment at the very least. I went up to the door and looked out. Only one of them was there. He stood there, mask covering his face, right up near the door, still knocking repeatedly. But it was just him, and that somehow freaked me out. Where was the other one? I backed away from the door, trying to gather my thoughts, and then I heard a soft creak behind me. A door swinging open in the hallway. I turned my body around. There was a shadowy figure at the end of the hall, and the instant I looked at him, he began charging toward me, a knife in his hand. I sprinted up the stairs and into my bedroom, locking it and shoving everything I could in front of it. I started calling the police while trying to figure out what to do next. Outside the door, I could hear the muffled sound of the two individuals talking back and forth. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I think they were also debating what to do. And after 30 seconds, their footsteps moved back downstairs and out of the house. A few officers came over and conducted an investigation, but they didn't find much to go on. We all agreed, though, that one of them knocking at the front door was likely a distraction, so the other could find a way in and jump me. Why they targeted me is the biggest mystery, though, and it still has me terrified. Many people I spoke to believe it was a couple of disturbed teenagers, or even young adults who had some malicious plan in mind for Halloween night. That would explain all of it happening to me without any apparent reason, but I don't think I'll ever know for sure. Story 2. By Jonathan F. Right behind my neighborhood lies a reasonably large forest featuring numerous trails suitable for hiking and camping. I often visited many of these trails, but I frequently found the experience significantly more enjoyable when I was completely alone. I steered clear of all the major campgrounds and preferred to set up my tent along some of the less traveled backpacking trails. I undertook this particular camping trip sometime towards the end of autumn. As I recall, all the trees were bare of leaves, and the weather was growing progressively colder with each passing day. I believed I would be fine for at least 1 or 2 more trips before winter arrived. I commenced my hike midday. There were no cars or people anywhere near the trailhead, and along the 8-mile hike, I didn't encounter anyone at all. I suspect most people had likely finished their hiking and camping for the season. The temperature was considerably colder than I had anticipated, but I was prepared with heavy jackets and a sleeping bag rated for -20°, which was more than adequate for my needs. Eventually, I came upon an open spot that seemed like a perfect place to set up camp for the night. It was just a short distance off the main trail, and I was fairly certain I had actually camped there once or twice before, so I felt comfortable as I erected my tent, constructed a small fire ring, and got a campfire going. I brewed a hot cup of decaf to help warm up as I sat right beside the fire. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped steadily. There was also a breeze, it seemed, carrying cold wind towards my face and honestly making the experience more miserable than I had hoped for. And there was something else. I kept noticing something in the distance, way out in the trees. It was far enough away to blend in with everything, the dry branches and bushes. So I couldn't determine what it was, but it felt as though whoever or whatever it was remained at just the right distance to prevent me from seeing them. Only their movement between the trees was visible, and as the sun continued its descent, this only made me feel more uneasy. The idea that I was being stalked started creeping into my thoughts, but I tried to dismiss it. I didn't want to even consider that possibility. I really hoped it wasn't a person at all and was merely a deer or some harmless animal roaming its territory. An hour after sundown, with night fully overhead, the uneasy feeling combined with the chilling winds made me quite uncomfortable. I thought perhaps addressing one of those issues might help. So I moved into the tent and inside my sleeping bag to warm up. I left the opening unzipped, with the flaps secured to the top, so I could still get a bit of warmth from the campfire and watch the flames as I lay inside. It certainly helped me stay warm, but only being able to see what was directly in front of me wasn't particularly comforting. Furthermore, beyond perhaps 10 feet of the campfire, it was just complete darkness. I should also mention that I'd been camping for years, so this feeling of being alone in the woods at night wasn't unfamiliar. And yet, this was the sole instance I'd ever felt this specific way. People always advise that when you get a bad feeling or sense something is amiss, you should simply pack up and leave without hesitation. I was naive enough to believe I'd never experienced that feeling. And even worse, I was foolish not to listen to it if I had. I remained in the tent, curled up in my sleeping bag, watching the fire. A good 2 or 3 hours passed. Nothing really changed except it grew colder. But as I lay there, I started to hear what sounded like cracking footsteps moving across the woods. It was coming from behind my tent, the one area I couldn't see at all. I wanted to get up and look, but I found myself frozen. Panic began to set in as my mind tried to rationalize every possible way that what I was hearing wasn't what it seemed. The footsteps crept closer and closer, getting perhaps 5 to 10 feet away from the back of the tent before it abruptly went silent. The crunching stopped, and the sounds of the campfire and wind blowing through the woods filled the space. My heart was pounding in my chest. Embarrassingly, I think I remained frozen in place for a full minute before the dread and anxiety of knowing someone was right behind my tent became too much to bear. In one swift motion, I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and jumped out of the tent, shining the light directly into the woods behind me. Nothing. No one was there. Somehow, this actually made me panic even more. I hadn't heard any footsteps walking away. So, honestly, a part of me thought I might be losing my mind. I must have stood there, swiveling around and shining the flashlight in every direction for 15 minutes, listening to every sound the woods made and being completely unsure of what to do next. Whether to pack up and try to run out of the forest in the dark, or stay put and just keep watch. I was freezing though, and the fire was running low on fuel. After a while, I decided to start packing. I wasn't sure yet if I'd leave or stay near the campsite, but packing seemed like a sensible idea either way. As soon as I began taking down my tent, a flurry of footsteps moved from the dark area just behind it. I thought I might have caught a glimpse of them running away too, but with the flickering campfire casting shadows on everything, I couldn't be certain. I quickly packed up, stopping every few seconds to look around. I was completely paranoid. After a few minutes, I managed to get everything stowed in my bag. I slung it over my shoulders, and before I could properly extinguish the fire, a man appeared across from me. He walked up quickly, approaching the light. He was taller and larger, wearing torn jeans, a dirty fleece jacket, and a black beanie. He looked around 40 and had heavy, distant eyes. Leaving so late felt wrong. It was far too cold to be running out into the dark like that. He spoke in a grating, firm voice. I didn't even respond, taking a few steps back. The man seemed to be trying to figure out how to keep me there. But once I started to get further away, I could see in his face that he realized he wasn't in control. His eyes grew into an unsettling stare. I turned and just started running straight into the trees. I could barely see where I was going, but I could hear the man's footsteps coming up behind me. After about 30 seconds, though, I'd either run too far for him to follow, or he simply stopped chasing. I still ran for 15 more minutes, just to be safe, and put as much distance as possible between us. But then I was lost. It was pitch black, and there was no way for me to know which way would lead me back to the trail. And even if I went the right way, I probably wouldn't be able to see the trail in the dark. So I sat down against a tree in the middle of the darkness and just waited. Hours passed as I sat there shivering. The entire forest was silent and still pitch black. I swear, though, a couple of times I heard something moving in the distance, out in the trees, like the man was still walking around looking for me. I just remained quiet and waited for the sun to rise, allowing me to see where I was and find my way back. I made it out unharmed, which I honestly think is a miracle. I believe that man had some truly malicious intentions that I barely escaped from. He had likely been stalking me all night, waiting for a moment to act. Why it all unfolded the way it did, I don't know. Story 3, by Anonymous. Last fall, my sister took a trip during the Halloween weekend. It was for some kind of party she was attending, but since she was flying there, bringing her dog Milo wasn't particularly convenient. She would only be gone for a couple of days though, and I offered to watch Milo while she was away. The apartment I lived in didn't allow pets, so rather than bringing Milo to my place, I simply stayed at her house for the weekend. I gathered my work laptop and some other miscellaneous items I might need, then drove the 30 minutes down to the house that morning. Roughly an hour after I arrived, my sister left for her trip. Now, Milo was a very easy dog to care for. I had done this numerous times before. He was incredibly sweet and wasn't particularly loud either, despite being a German Shepherd. He was getting older, so most of the time he just hung out in whatever room I was in and relaxed while I worked. So I set my laptop up in one of the spare bedrooms and began my workday. Milo lay in his dog bed right next to my desk, just out of my peripheral vision. Aside from me working, there wasn't much happening for several hours, but strangely throughout the day he kept lifting his head. Normally, I'd assume it was just a dog being a dog, hearing something small that was really nothing. But this was different. He seemed certain he'd actually heard something because he wouldn't just go right back to sleep. Milo's head would raise and his ears would perk up, and he'd stare at the doorway for a whole 5 to 10 minutes. This occurred frequently enough for me to get up at one point and look around the house. Milo followed me as I did. He stayed right by my side, focused as if he was also searching for something. I never found or saw anything, but it definitely gave me a sense that something was off. I believe I finished working around 5 or 6. Since it was fall, we had about an hour before it got dark and cold. So I attached Milo to his leash and took him out behind the house for a walk. My sister had been fortunate with this location, essentially having a preserved forest trail right behind it. But at this time of year, all the trees along the path had already lost their leaves and looked basically dead. This actually made it feel a bit spooky, especially since it was later in the afternoon. It was also incredibly quiet out there. Just me and Milo walking, the sound of us crunching through all the dry leaves on the trail. I knew the trail was about a 20-minute loop, and we had gone down roughly halfway when suddenly Milo stopped, just completely stopped in place. I looked at him, asked if he was okay, and tugged on the leash, but he wouldn't budge. He wouldn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on something ahead of me. I turned and looked down the trail, but I didn't see anything. I looked back down at Milo, pet him, then gently tugged the leash forward again. But he still wouldn't move, and his gaze was still fixed at something down at the end of the trail, further into the forest, so I simply turned and began heading back. Milo immediately followed. For the rest of the walk back to the house, he kept looking back, but never once stopped to sniff or anything. He just kept his tail down and followed right next to me all the way back to the house. It made me feel really nervous seeing him so nervous. I wasn't entirely sure, though, whether it was his nervousness that was bothering me or what he was so scared of. I eventually called my sister and talked to her for a bit after getting back inside, asking if she might know why he was acting like this, but she had no idea. Even throughout that phone call, Milo was glued to my side. This made me feel unsettled or uneasy, as if he was aware of something I wasn't. I started walking through the house again as I thought about it, and casually glanced out a few of the windows. But it wasn't until I got back upstairs to the spare bedroom that I looked out that window and saw something peculiar. It was just for a fleeting moment, but I thought I saw someone out there right near the house, someone walking from left to right, disappearing past the edge of the window before I could get a clear look. It was almost like when you see something out of the corner of your eye and you think what you saw, but when you look, you realize it was nothing. So I couldn't say whether what I saw was real or just my mind playing tricks because I was so on edge. I stayed up in that room, sitting at the desk and trying to relax for the rest of the night. I watched some videos on my laptop and kept an eye on Milo. He stayed quiet, lying near me and seeming exhausted from the day. For the next 2 or so hours we were up there. Nothing much happened. Milo was fast asleep, and I was just watching YouTube and trying to unwind. Even with all the strangeness going on, I was somehow able to distance my mind from it. Not that I totally forgot about it all, but I guess I thought it just wasn't anything serious. Once it grew late, I started getting ready for bed and brought Milo downstairs to let him outside one last time. I opened the back door and turned on the lights. Milo was hesitant but still went out. As he did his business, I looked around. The woods surrounding the house were quiet and eerie. I watched Milo walk towards the trees, then stop and turn, not facing me but staring at something at the side of the house. I peered around the doorway and looked. Within seconds, all I saw was a man charging towards me. I jumped back and Milo started sprinting at him. The guy's expression seemed horrified for a second. He stopped dead in his tracks, trying to dodge the dog. I thought Milo was actually about to attack the guy for a moment, but at the very last second, he backed off and started barking and growling while responding to my commands and running back inside. I shut the door and locked it, and before I could see anything else, the guy was gone, just like that, in a matter of seconds. Everything was quiet again. I quickly called 911. To be completely honest, though, the police were no help at all. They shone their lights around, but that was about it. However, as we were discussing what had happened, I was fiddling with the door and discovered that the lock on the back door actually didn't work. The lever would click and everything, but it would still open. My sister was certain it had never been like that before. That night I took Milo to a hotel and we spent the next day there. Based on Milo's behavior, I believe the man was probably watching us all day and perhaps even following us out in the woods on our walk. But also, there's a possibility he had been inside the home before, maybe even during the day while I was working. I keep reflecting on how Milo was constantly looking at the doorway, and the malfunctioning lock on the back door seems like a really big coincidence. But Milo definitely startled him enough to get us both inside safely and scare him away. I'm actually quite surprised, though, because my sister hasn't experienced anything weird or any encounters since then. It almost makes me think that the man wasn't there for her. Perhaps he'd been watching me for longer than I realized, and found out I'd be alone at a house in the woods rather than safely in my apartment building with other people around. And so, he thought it would be his best chance to do whatever he was trying to do. Probably something terrible. I can't say for sure, but I've been on edge ever since.